Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, and you probably recognize my guest because she's coming back to my channel. Paula Kibildis, welcome back.
Hi. Yeah, thank you.
So last time we were here, we were discussing sorceress. It's a garment that you created using Shetland lace. And if you guys wanna learn more about that, I'll put the link in the description of this video so you can watch that episode. But today we're talking about your newest creation, a shawl, a circular shawl that's called in Starlight. And I want to start talking about it with how our conversation started. You reached out to me and you said, I created this shawl and I need a tester for it. Would you please test it for me? And I said, I'm sorry, I can't. Because I was in the middle of like 10 different projects and I had plans for others. And I knew that this shawl is going to take a lot of time. It's a huge
Yeah.
shawl, it's very generously sized shawl. I've never done circular show, so I had a lot of hesitations, but it was so beautiful when you sent me a picture of it. Like, and I was like, part of me really wanted it. Part of me was really scared because I knew that it's just something that will take a long time and a lot of effort, and I would have to put all my other plans on hold for months. So it was like I was in between those, like I was torn basically. I wanted to do it and I didn't want to get into it. And also, it's been over a year since I knitted Shetland lace. So I felt like I was very rusty. I didn't know if
You
if I
needed to get
if I
back into
still got
the,
it. Yeah.
yeah.
And mind you, like when people now look at the show and they comment and they talk about my skills, I don't see myself as a very skilled Shetland lace knitter because I'm still relatively new to that. Like there are people who've been knitting Shetland lace for decades. I'm
Since
not
they
one
were
of those.
children.
Right. I'm
Yeah.
not one of them. So
Yeah.
for me it's still a learning process. It's still adjusting my tension. It's still learning new things. Um, but I think it's also a good thing because if I could do it, a lot of new people to lace could do it as well. And what I find interesting about this show, and we'll go into details of the construction of it and how we dealt with the difficulties that presented themselves due to construction of it. But I also want to mention that it's surprisingly easy shawl to knit because every repeat is very narrow. So usually, like when you talk about Shetland lace, the difficult part about Shetland lace is that repeats can be like 50, 60 or more stitches wide.
Right, when you have a large
Right.
picture area
And
of,
also, like, there is a lot of different elements happening at the same time, right? So, like, you
right,
might have some zigzag and some diamonds and everything happening in one row because
right.
due to that, like, very wide repeat. With this
Mhm.
shawl, because it's so large and because it's so ornate, it seems very difficult. But the reality of it, some repeats are 12 stitches wide, some repeats are like it's up to 20 something. So it's like very narrow repeats for Shetland lace.
Yeah.
And it's the same exact ornament going in the circle. So it's actually super easy to memorize.
Yeah, it is. Let me talk a tiny bit about how this idea for this design developed.
Yeah, please.
It for me. I of course I try to make a good design when I'm designing lace. I try to make something that is a nice complete picture, but it always evolves for me out of a fascination with a particular motif, you know? And I love hexagons. And 2 years ago, I created a shawl in this famous Elizabeth Zimmerman pi R square form, which is basically a half circle with two front panels. So you have a long, like a big U shaped. And I started working, I thought, I love hexagons and I love beads. And I wanted to make successive rows of bead hexagons. and which is this is really the only motif in this shawl.
Right.
You have mesh, and then you have a bead hexagon. First of all, in the center with one bead, and then two beads, three beads, four beads, and at the time, a couple of people tested that shawl, and at the time, one of our group members said, "Oh, would you mind if I do this? If I turn it into a circle?" I said, go for it. I don't have the head for it right now because figuring out the design for this one is enough for me. And this was 2 years ago. But her finished object turned out beautifully. But it was a more improvised. She took one motif here, she left one out there. And so this year I decided finally it's time. And like you, I was terrified because I have knit a couple of circular shawls in my life, but not one of this complexity, not one with Shetland motifs. And I said, okay, it's time to bite off a chunk and see if you can do it. I thought I'm going to have to do a lot of math with this one, But actually, I wound up not having to do any math, or hardly any at all, because the repeats are always multiples of 4. They're all multiples of 4, and it all works out, and it fit together perfectly. Even though it was just, I didn't try to make it fit together perfectly. I didn't look for an exciting pattern. I just said, I want a bunch of bead hexagons, and I want a little starry night sky in between them, and that just somehow just sort of worked out that way. But as you said, this is what makes it very simple. You can memorize the motifs.
And I think it's because those diamonds the hexagons, they just become longer. But the
Right,
idea is the same, so it's
right.
becoming
You're
like easier.
familiar with the type of motif.
I want to talk about it a little bit more here because I've mentioned it in a few of my videos. But what I find when people tell me that they're intimidated by lace, to me, it became this familiar friend basically. But it's also like it reminds me of reading, right? Like so when you first learn how to read, you know that this is how the letter looks and this is how the letter sounds, and then you learn how to add two letters together, and at some point your brain just recognizes the word. Even if you miss half of the letters, you sort of can guess the word, right? And with knitting Shetland lace, I find it the same. So I remember first starting Shetland lace, and I stumbled into Shetland lace like accidentally, basically. I was on Instagram, I saw some posts by Monique Boonstra, a passion for lace, and I was like, oh my God, what is it? She said it's Shetland lace. I went to the library, I found one book on Shetland lace at that time. It was Elizabeth Lovick, Magical Shetland lace shawls, and the front page had this heart stole, and I was like, oh my God, this is so pretty, let me knit it. Like I did not understand that it's supposed to be difficult. I just jumped right in, and it's like
Right.
somehow it,
Right.
like I happened to knit it.
Yeah.
But what I find about Shetland lace, like at that time, I remember looking at every symbol and trying not to lose my way in a row.
Right.
And by now, my brain recognized the sequences. Like I can see knit two together, yarn over, knit one, yarn over, slip, slip, knit, and I see it as one word, basically. So it's becoming much easier to read the charts.
I think it's really interesting that you experience it that way. For me, it's slightly different because I think everybody at this point knows I'm a musician. I've been a professional violinist all my life long, and for me, it's like music. It's like recognizing patterns in music. And I have one adult student at the moment who I adore working with. She played as a kid, and stopped, and is because she felt too much pressure of competition. But she's in her mid 30s now, and she wants to find back to that fearless place of playing music when she was a kid. And we do a lot of improvisation exercises together. And that's what we talk about. We about creating your own songs, about creating a melody, and how it's just the finger patterns. You teach your body certain patterns, 1 3 1 2 1 3 2. Okay, and you do that on the next string, and then you play this pattern, and somehow it generates a new pattern. And I find knitting lace is like this. The patterns, when you're knitting them, or even when you're seeing them, when you're experiencing them, one pattern suggests another. And they sort of all organically fit together, and they create new patterns in themselves. It's like you say, it's like reading. You don't see just a letter, you see a word, and then you start to see sentences, and then you hopefully at end of days we see a whole book there.
Right.
It's
Well,
a
talking
it's
of the whole book, that shawl,
yeah.
um, it starts with just 12 stitches, 13 stitches, like
12,
just
yeah,
just a dozen, right?
right.
And then it grows basically like from that little center, it grows on. My hardest thing about this shawl was dealing with that start.
Beginning, yeah.
I
Mine
restarted,
too.
yeah, and I restarted, I think it was like 7, 8 times. I restarted until I was finally somewhat satisfied with how it looks. So I want to talk about it from two standpoints, right? One, to tell people how I dealt with my difficulties and why I found it difficult.
Right.
But
But somebody
also,
who people look at as a talented, experienced knitter, and for you to describe your hurdles with it for them so that they're more willing to jump themselves.
right, but also the fact that something doesn't go according to plan from get-go doesn't mean that it's doomed, right?
It doesn't
Because
end well.
if
Yeah.
I gave up after trying 2 times, I wouldn't have this shawl on my mannequin right now. The
Mhm.
fact that, like, I mean, there is nothing undoable in this world of lace. So it's just a matter of finding the right tools for you. And what works for one person might not work for another person. So I want to tell
Right.
you guys what worked for me at the end to start this show. So I at first I tried doing magic loop. The problem with magic loop, I found that the cord itself is so much thicker than the yarn.
And the
And
yarn. Right.
just for your reference, for this shawl, I used the yarn that Monique Drafe sent me, and it's 2,800 meters per 100 grams superfine merino. Yeah,
Here,
it's
there we
really
go.
fine. Yeah.
Yes.
So um, the cord that I used for magic loop was probably like 100 times wider than the thread. And
Right.
so I found that on the places where there was the magic loop, so there's two places where you loop it, the distance between the stitches was so much bigger than at the end of it at other places that it just like looked super wonky. So I tried, like I did probably like that much, and I hated how it looked. I was like, I can't leave this that in the center of my shawl. Like I have to find a way to make it neater. So it wasn't that I was not capable of knitting it. Like I could have left it like that and continue, but I just wanted to make it look neat and perfect, and maybe not perfect, but like better, right? So then the next thing, I was trying to do the DPNs, the
Double points. Yeah.
double pointed needles. Um, I just hated the process because you have 13 stitches and 5 DPNs. and it just like this cluster of DPNs that I couldn't even see which needle was next and like which direction I was going. It just like it somehow like, and I also had metal needles at the beginning when I started it. So the metal was sliding. It just like irritated the hell out of me. It wasn't my personal favorite. So I was like, okay, maybe I need bamboo needles. So I ordered a set of bamboo DPNs. It was a little bit better, but it was still like super clustered in the at the very beginning for me. And then I thought, what if I'll start with magic loop? And then as soon as I have more stitches, like 40 stitches, I switch to DPNs and try it that way. So that's how I worked with the center of that shawl. Like that was the seventh try with different needles.
You actually did start with a magic
Right.
loop,
I
though.
did start with the magic loop just because I found it like much easier to manage. So the first, until I got to 40 stitches or so, like somewhere in that vicinity, it's still so close in, and I'll insert some close-up pictures so you guys can see what I'm talking about. It's still so tiny that you don't really see that spacing for the magic loop. And
Right.
then if you switch quickly enough to the double pins, you close the gaps between the four double pins in the corners there. Because
Yeah.
like with double pins, it's easier to close that gap. And then once I got to 9 inches, I switched to the 9-inch needle. And from that point, it was like smooth sailing. So my hardest part, my biggest struggle with this show, well, there was two.
Was this very beginning.
It was the very beginning. And so you have to, like, when you need this show, you have to find what tools will work for you. So for me, the easiest way was to start with magic loop, and then as soon as you have enough stitches to switch it to the double points, switch it to double points, and then as soon as you get to something around 9 inches when you can just knit in the circle without the gaps, switch to the 9 inch, and then you like start changing the needles as you go as it grows. What was your
Yes,
method?
but I did the opposite.
Okay, tell me.
I started with I started with double point needles, and I also, like you, I had to start over 7 or 8 times to get the tension right, to get it as neat as I wanted it. Um, and I think what I did, I started, of course, with one needle. You cast on onto a single needle, and I think I knit one row, or maybe even two, before joining it. And then I joined onto three.
Okay.
Only three needles. And later, when I had about 40 stitches, I switched to four. I added another needle in. I find that with tension issues, I think it's the same with magic loop as with double point needles, that when you in order to avoid gaps, you just switch the place
Right. Yep.
around. Even with a double point needle, sometimes I would knit 1 or 2 stitches farther so that the place changes where the needle change is. But I did the opposite as you. People have told me, or not told me, but I've heard or read reports that people start on toothpicks sometimes. At that point, the size doesn't matter so
Right.
much for the first couple of stitches. So,
Yeah, I think it's just the matter of getting those pesky connection points as small as you can. And I think it's like
right.
with double points, it's easier to achieve that tighter connection than with magic loop.
Yeah,
But
maybe.
like basically, once you get to the place where you can knit on the round um, without magic loop or without the double points, that's like
Right.
that's where the flow gets in. Like
You're
so,
right.
stay persevere with the beginning. Like if you need this shawl, just know that you're not alone. You're not the only person who's struggling with it. And then
It
at
will
the end,
take you
it's gonna
many
be.
hours. It will take a few hours to get it right, I
But the
think.
funny part that like once you get to the point where you can knit on a single circular needle, it becomes so easy that like you're just flying through it because in comparison to the
Right.
beginning, it's so
And
much easier.
then you get to watch it grow. Another circle comes, a little starry section. Oh, now we have more beads. Oh, now there. Oh, look,
I
the
mean,
whole for the whole first this much of it that goes very quickly, and it gives immediate gratification.
well, you and I talked about it last time. I find that like a lot of people talk about mindless knitting, Netflix knitting, and to me, that kind of knitting is actually anxiety inducing kind of knitting because when my hands know what they're doing and I don't have to pay attention, my mind travels in the directions that it's like I rather not go there. Whereas when I'm knitting fine lace, you have to concentrate, like even if it's easy lace you still have to concentrate. You can't lose the stitch. You should pay attention to how you insert the needle and how the
Right,
tension goes, and suddenly you find yourself in a very meditative state because your mind concentrates on task at hand versus like all the worries in the world. and
right.
i and I found myself like very thankful to you that you convinced me to do this test neat. I mean, I don't know if you convinced me or I convinced myself, but like I was very grateful for the situation because before that I was doing like I was knitting bunch of different projects. There was tight deadlines. I was worried about like getting to the deadline, and suddenly I found myself in, in Starlight.
Yeah,
This dreamy state of just like enjoying the
yeah,
place and seeing how beautiful it becomes. And you're so right, like when you first start it grows really fast at the beginning because you
right.
start with like 12 stitches and then, before you know it you like on the big circular needle. And I was just like, I think it took me longer because I kept stopping and just admiring how beautiful it looks. It's like I have so many videos of me just like stretching like literally 4 inches
Yeah,
of that lace and just,
yeah,
admiring how beautiful it already looks. So I find that like if you're looking for something to truly find that calm, that inner peace, I find that lace knitting is the best recipe you can get. Like, if you wanna forget all the worries in your life, if you wanna find the beauty, the slow your life again, and find this like appreciation for the beauty, I could not recommend a better pattern for
I
that.
agree with you 200%. I mean, yeah, it's very often, even when I'm knitting lace, when there are patterns that are simpler, like with this shawl, my mind does tend to wander, but you have to pay attention. But where my mind goes is into designing. I find myself, I find new patterns creating themselves in my head, like I was saying before with the music, because of what I'm knitting. Something else happens in my creative mind as well, which is really, it's it's weird, but it's exciting. It's an exciting thing. And also, the whole first section up until the final chart, which changes, the last chart with the clamshells is a little bit more complicated, but up till then, it has resting points. You can put it down and for a while. You can put it down for a few days or a week and not be afraid that you won't know where to pick up again because it's very simple rhythm.
And I
It's
actually had to put it down for a bit here and there because I was traveling a lot. I also
right.
promised a friend of mine to knit a fully cabled sweater in 8 days. Don't ask me how I did that. So like there were
Was
other projects
imposed.
that were. Yeah, there were like other projects happening while I was knitting it. So I wasn't a monogamous knitter for this shawl. And we started sometime in mid-January, I think, like when we really started. So the thing is, as I was knitting this shawl, another thing that was absolutely new for me, because I never knitted circular shawls, was the pearl rows. So I want to talk about the pearl rows. So because it's a circular shawl, every other row here is like usually when you knit Shetland lace and it's flat knitting, you just knit
Knit, 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 knit.
everything is garter stitch based. But because it's a circular shawl and you knit in the round, you have to do pearl rows. And at the very beginning, that was sort of tripping me up a little bit because I was like, oh my God, like, am I on the pearl row and am I on the knit row? Like, I had to remind myself that I have to switch. And then after a while, it becomes automatic. Like, you see the stitch and you know that it was knit stitch. So you know now you're on the pearl row. So it becomes easy.
Right. Yeah.
But let's talk about the difficulty of pearl row and the decreases in the pearl row and what you
Right.
told me.
I have sort of my own hybrid way of doing it, and the way I deal with that. Also, I've done in the last year, I've done a couple of large squares, and I treat this the same way. They're knit in the round, and on the purl rounds, the decrease stitches I knit. I do them as knitted decreases and purl the plain stitches in between them. It's sometimes kind of tricky to look at it to see where the yarn overs are then when you're on the next round, because you sometimes flip the yarn, you have to flip the yarn back and forth. But I find it much simpler to do it that way. Purling two through the back loop is, I don't think there's anyone who enjoys it, is
Right.
there?
And I also think like there is a lot of there like when we talk about mistakes, right? And I had a lot of comments saying, "Oh my God, like this is so pristine. Like like what do you do if there's mistakes?" And I said, "I'm sure there are mistakes because I'm sure there are like spots where I forgot that it was supposed to be a pearl stitch and I needed a stitch. Like if somebody 100 years from now finds this shawl in a museum and decides to study it and rechart it, I'm sure they're gonna find all those mistakes. But like if my life depends on it right now, I probably can't, So like unless you're really looking for the difference between pearl two together through the back loop, or if you just knit them two together, you're not gonna see the difference. It's like really hard to see the difference there.
No, your eye is so occupied with the pattern itself as a texture that it doesn't go one level closer to look at the individual stitches, the texture of the stitches. If you have a large stretch of plain garter stitch or plain stockinette, then we see that. But as soon as there's patterning on it, that becomes a texture of its own.
So I found it the same way. Like I found it that I was knitting the decreases and then purling all the stitches between the decreases, and that just like makes it much faster for me personally. It's
Right.
not impossible to purl two together through the back loop, but it's just like more cumbersome and it breaks
It
the
takes
rhythm of it.
longer, and it's you're in danger of dropping one of those stitches
Right.
more. It's more complicated.
Well,
And
another flex, if you will,
yeah,
of mine and yours was the fact that we didn't use any stitch markers except for the beginning of the round markers. But I'll explain why we did that, right? Because right now I'm knitting a much simpler lace shawl and I have like 10 stitch markers there. But because the repeats were so narrow, and it was the same exact repeat going all around the circle, you really couldn't miss it. Like there was plain stitches on both sides of the actual design of the hexagon, So you would see where one stops and another begins. So there was no need for stitch markers. It wasn't our super strength and talent as Shetland lace knitters. It
Right,
was just not necessary for this specific shawl to have any other stitch
right.
markers except for beginning of the round.
Anybody who would feel maybe a little bit more insecure than either you or I. I mean, I didn't use them in the final chart either.
Right.
Um, but but I would maybe if someone felt less secure, I would recommend that for that chart, maybe on the first few rounds until the pattern is set up, when I have a 30, what is that one is I think about 30 stitches, the
Right.
repeat. Then you can use a very you but then you need to use something very fine as a stitch
Yeah,
marker as
that's
well.
another thing because like you're knitting with such a thin yarn, you have to be very careful with what kind of stitch markers you can use because a
Right.
lot of times the stitch markers, even the thinnest wire stitch markers with like a tiny little plastic bead on it, can be too heavy and create holes. So you have to be like really careful with what works for such fine lace like as a stitch marker.
What I use for yarn this fine, if I rarely ever use a stitch marker, but are those the little safety pins that have a little round bottom
Yeah.
on them. I find those the best option for my.
I have a friend who made me these markers. So they made out of a thin cord and
Mhm.
very light bead on the end. And somehow it weighs nothing. It weighs much less than the markers made with wire. And I find them like they were surprisingly, like when I saw them, I thought they were too bulky, but
Yeah,
surprisingly they weigh nothing, and so they don't create that hole where you place the marker. So maybe you guys can make your own markers. So you may just take a cord and then add some bead or just a knot even at the
yeah.
end of it. I discovered something new for myself thanks to one of the friends on Instagram. Another thing that was sort of took me by surprise was the edging. And we talked about that, like, because like you think like you got the whole body knitted and like you're almost there. And then this edging humbles you because it doesn't matter how fast of a knitter you are, how many hours in a day you have, it's gonna take a long time. Like each point of the edging is about 950 stitches or so. And it's interesting that like at the beginning, when I started doing edging, it was taking me close to an hour. I was just like timing myself just for my own curiosity. It wasn't an Olympic sport to finish it in time, it was just like to see how it goes. And at the beginning, it was taking me close to an hour. Towards the end, it went down to like 37, 40 minutes, somewhere there.
Wow, good for
So it
you.
was
I haven't gotten it down that far myself, but
it's one of those edgings that I think it's close to impossible to memorize. It's
it's
just wide
the repeat is
enough,
too long.
and it's 20 rows. It's close to 55 stitches at the
Right,
longest.
and it's 50, I think 51 at its widest
Right.
point. Yeah.
So it's just like a lot of stitches and a lot of rows to remember. So at some point, like I remembered some rows, but not all rows. So it's not something that like you can just knit from your memory. But it's also like you start again recognizing the patterns in it. So it's you sort of predict where it's gonna go next. You just check yourself, but like you almost know.
And a good thing to know about it is also that it, it's very, no, I have to check to make sure I'm not lying, but I don't think that there are any two rows that are exactly the same.
No, nothing
You
was
can
exactly the same.
you can, and if you put it down because the doorbell rang, and you come back to it and you think, oh no, what row was I on? You can read back through your stitches and find the right place because
Actually, I want
it,
to talk about that a little bit because when I first started Shetland Lace, I
yeah,
joined the Find Shetland Lace group on Facebook. It was brand new group organized by Monique Boonstra back like we're talking like probably 6 years ago or something.
right,
Um, and the very first thing the people who and people who'd first join, they were gurus of Shetland lace. They had
right, yeah,
ages under their belts, in
yeah,
Shetland lace. And they decided to do a knit along for Love Dark,
yeah,
which is like if you can find more complicated pattern, it's not that easy basically. And I
right,
decided like what can possibly go wrong, and I jumped right in. And I remember like asking questions that they probably thought were the silliest questions ever, but like nothing was obvious to me. One of the people in the group, I was asking, but like, how do I know if there is a mistake in the pattern or if it's my mistake? How do I find mistake? And she said, well, just learn to read your knitting. And I think that was the most empowering and smartest advice I've ever received about Shetland lace or lace in general is that if you know how to read your knitting, you can find those mistakes and you can find those mistakes much faster. So you're not going
right.
to find the mistake 50 rows later, it's you're going to see it right away almost.
Right, and once you become familiar with the pattern, you begin to get a feel for a mistake as it's happening.
Right.
You think, wait a minute, that decrease before was yarn over and a knit stitch, and now it's a knit stitch and a yarn over, so maybe I'm doing something wrong. And also I when looking I keep my chart for that edging. I have to keep the chart next to me. Like you said, there are a few places where you just breeze through. The first row of it is very easy to
Right.
memorize. Um, but as I am knitting, I always keep an eye on the row below as well. Maybe not always, but from time to time I make sure, okay, am I knitting, should I be knitting into a yarn over now? Rather than just looking at the row I'm knitting, I look at the row below,
But it's
which
again,
is
it's the recognition of like the alignment, right? Like everything in lace. Like the thing about lace, it's not that you can knit one row and then on the next row you can just like if you miss a stitch you can just add a stitch because that's gonna screw up the whole alignment of the lace. So
right.
in lace, like knowing how to read your lace, it's all about like understanding the alignment of stitches. So you see if there's like yarn over below and where this in the next yarn over on the next row is supposed to be in consideration to that previous yarn over. So it's like
Right.
you start reading the directions of the chart, in decrease.
There are Shetland lace is very much like that because of its rectangular alignment. It's almost always, there are rarely any curves in it, hardly ever. And the alignment issues start happening when you have lace that has curves in it. So, and one pattern I did a while back, also a year or two ago, where I used this antique pattern center for there is a shawl in the museum that has a couple of different ones that have this center pattern, and Sharon Miller transcribed it in her book, and I used it for a shawl. It has There's a row that where the actual number of stitches changes. And I spent an age trying to figure out what the most intelligent way to chart it is so that so that the chart shows you what you're actually doing. And I wound up putting two little red arrows in the box, not on the chart itself, but with an example next to the chart. Because the alignment on the chart, there was no way to make the chart line up
Right.
with that stitch. You understand what I'm saying, though, right?
Yes,
Sometimes you can't make the chart align, but in Shetland lace, that hardly ever happens.
right. I found also another thing that was interesting to me about this particular shawl is that it starts with the smallest of the hexagons, and then they grow and they grow, and then you come to the more complicated part of the chart. And then when you arrive to the edging, like even if you were a complete beginner when you started, you already like have enough mastery to deal with the edging by the
Right.
time you get to it.
It's worthwhile to give yourself a kick in the butt to get over the beginning, to
Right.
really devote yourself to finishing that beginning, even if you feel like you want to throw your needles out the window. But because, as you said, once you start going, you develop skills.
I mean, what I found about this specific shawl that like when you first start, it's simple enough. You're only dealing with the, the tension issues basically, but the charts itself themselves, they're like very easy. And by the time you get to more complicated stuff towards the end of the shawl and the edging, you already have all the skills you need to deal with any difficulty in chart. I mean, and it's not, again, in Shetland lace, I find nothing is really difficult. It just the wider the repeat, the more stitches you have to pay attention to. But it's the
Right.
same, the same knit yarn over, knit two together, and double center increase. Like it's the same simple stitches basically. So,
Right. And
but
what's most difficult about the more complicated motifs is the first two rows, the first until the pattern is established and you can see it.
right.
Then, yeah.
I mean, to me, it was an absolute joy to knit this shawl because it was, it's whether you want it or not, it slows you down. It
Yeah.
brings back the appreciation of the things that you can create with your two hands. And it's also connects you with all the previous generation of talented knitters that came up with this elements of Shetland lace and what makes it Shetland
Right.
lace today. So to me, it was a beautiful process, and I'm just very grateful that you asked me and that like I did it, even though I had my own hesitations before.
I was very unsure if I should ask you because I knew how much it was to ask of someone to do this, but I didn't want to do it by myself. There are a couple of pieces that I've been my only test knitter for, and but for this one I wanted to be sure that certain things
Made it.
were easy enough to understand, like doing the beginning, and to have someone else's perspective on the technique of the beginning in particular, and also knitting in the round, and so I'm very, very grateful that you found your courage to to join in.
Well, I also think that if there is enough interest and if people have some questions about it, both you and I can help answering those questions because we've both been through the process of knitting this whole shawl. So if your hesitation is like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do it, trust us, you can do it. Start with it. And then if you have any questions, just reach out either to Paula or to me. I'm gonna leave
I'm
you
always
your information.
happy. I'm happy to help in any way I can, and people are free to contact me. I can be easily contacted on Facebook or Instagram or Ravelry. People
Right.
have sent me messages.
Well,
So,
I'm gonna put all the information about how they can find you in the description of this video, and also I'm gonna put
okay.
the link to the pattern. So if you guys wanna grab this pattern, it's on Ravelry now. And I hope you enjoyed our little chat. Give yourself the courage to try something new, learn some new skills, and perhaps you're gonna enjoy it as much as we do.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Paula. Thank you for being my guest today again and sharing your journey with the shawl.
Thank you, Irina. It's been lovely.